Welcome back to Secret Weapons, and today we're taking a look at the Jamstik MIDI guitar. For somebody like me who has put a lot of time and effort into leveling up their arrangements, mixing and producing workflows over the last 2 years here in my studio, but has not put that same amount of time and energy into getting my keyboard skills to where they need to be, something like the Jamstik MIDI guitar should be, at least in theory, the saving grace of my workflow. I am a guitar player first. I am not a remotely competent keys player, in my opinion. This should be something that really kind of like helps simplify my workflows. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about what this thing is as a guitar, what it is as a MIDI keyboard, how it bridges that gap, and whether or not this thing is good enough at either of those things to be worth your time and attention. But first things first, there's a couple things we're going to seek to do in this video that we just covered, as well as a couple things that we are not going to bother with in this video. Number one, we are not going to use this as in your day-to-day workflow. I don't find it to be a particularly useful, engaging, or fast workflow for getting kind of practical ideas down for all forms of instrument. And the other thing we're not going to do in this video is we are not going to do a deep dive into the kind of bundled synth software that this thing comes with. We will take a look at it in this video, but we're not going to deep dive into the Jamstik creator application that this thing kind of ships with. The beauty of this thing, and the reason I wanted to check it out, is because it has your 1/4 inch out for your guitar, as well as a TRS jack and a USB-C jack on the bottom here for the ability to control both outboard gear like your analog synths and that kind of thing, as well as control whatever VSTs you have in your DAW, whatever kind of like synth engines that you already use and like. I'm not interested in this as a way to replace the sounds I'm already reaching for. I want a more familiar and natural way of expressing myself through those instruments. So let's talk about this as a guitar first. This is a Strat style guitar, as you can tell by looking at it. You've got a super Strat configuration, humbucker, 2 single coils, 5-way switch, volume, tone, very conventional, very familiar. From like below the neck, you have a very conventional Strat here on display here. And then above that, you get into a slightly different version of a Strat, but nothing too far off the beaten path. You have a roasted maple neck, C-shaped profile, 22 frets, locking tuners, and a brass nut up top. The brass nut is an interesting choice. My assumption is that it's there to kind of increase the resonance of the strings to aid in this MIDI pickup's ability to kind of detect notes. That's my best guess for why they didn't go with a more conventional nut material in this instrument. The roasted maple neck is pretty comfortable. There's no fret sprouting on mine. There's no hard edges or anything that feels like unfinished. Oh, with the exception of one of the screws holding the 2-piece brass nut together kind of sits a little bit higher than the other one does on mine. I haven't tried to screw that in yet, but that is how it shipped to me, and I don't find that it has impeded my playing, so I haven't had to mess with it. But it's one of the few kind of fit finish out of the box issues that I find on this guitar. The other one being the intonation shipped for me a little bit wonky. You're a little bit out of key as you get way too far past the 12th fret, but that's a fit finish. That's not like a structural issue. That is just, I need to get this guitar set up. I find the tuning stability with these kind of like unnamed locking tuners to be fine once again. They are nothing amazing. They don't hold tune the way the locking tuners on my American Strats do, or some of the other high-end guitars in my studio. But in the world of like $1,000 and under, this roasted maple neck and these tuners seem to do the job just fine. Same thing with these pickups. You heard on that intro track, I would argue that the guitars sound pretty great. Granted, I am setting them up for success in a big way. We tracked all those guitars, mostly with a bridge pickup, because I think this humbucker sounds legitimately pretty great, into the Greer Lightspeed Overdrive, into this Matchless Chieftain. And if you can't make the Lightspeed into a Chieftain sound good, you're doing something wrong on a user error level. But on that front, as a guitar, it feels wholly competent in the world of about $1,000 guitars. I think the MIDI guitar that I'm using here, of the kind of like 3 levels of MIDI guitar, I think this one comes in at about $900. I think it was probably $800 when I first got it about 6 months ago, but you know, everything gets more expensive right now. So, by the time you see this video, it might still be right about $900 for this model, with upgrade models above this. But this is kind of the entry level of their non-headstockless versions of the MIDI guitar. And like I said, as a $900 Strat goes, it's pretty solid. It's a competently made guitar. It's comfortable enough to play, and you can get your ideas down as a guitar with absolutely no problems. But this isn't why I would buy a guitar like this. For me, this is mostly on the MIDI side, but if you are somebody looking for an all-in-one solution, this is a good option, and it doesn't require you to have to like route a MIDI pickup into an existing guitar that you have, which is quite nice. On the MIDI instrument side of things, you have, like I said, a power switch, and then 2 ways of getting MIDI out of this. You have a headphone jack style TRS port that will allow you to send the MIDI information from this pickup to your analog devices, or a USB-C port. And it actually comes with a really, really long, like an 8-foot long or something like that, USB-C cable that actually has a little 90-degree hook on one end of it. So you have a straight hook on, or a straight cable on one side and a 90-degree on the other. And this implementation of a 90-degree hook is actually really, really nice, because if you are kind of playing standing up, or you're playing and you don't want to like risk damaging your USB cable, it works really well in that kind of like, you can plug it in and loop it through your strap the way that you would with a conventional like instrument cable, really giving you an ability to perform with this in a live environment if you wanted to, without feeling like at any given time you could move the wrong way and snap your USB-C cable. So credit to Jamstik for, I think, maybe the best attention to detail in this entire shipment is this cable, which is not to discount the guitar being legitimately cool. It's just that that's a really nice small touch added into this instrument. So once you have it plugged in and you start recording, how does it perform? So this becomes a little bit more of a complicated issue. Getting VST, like synths, string arrangements, trumpets, pianos, all of that from this into your MIDI scroll is really interesting. And in my experience, requires some post-processing to really make things sit correctly. You can play and it will kind of track your notes for the most part pretty well, but because it is not kind of like sensing pressure on the frets to generate MIDI, but instead hearing the vibration and transferring that to a note, you are going to get more notes that end early because the pickup just stopped tracking. You're going to get more kind of ghost notes, especially if you're strumming, and you're going to get just those moments where like you are playing like a part that you normally play very like fluidly on your guitar. It's going to hear those passing notes, but when you're playing an analog instrument, those passing notes just kind of become ghost notes, essentially. Like you just don't really hear the wrong notes in between. Like, you know, if you're playing 3 notes, that middle note sounds very different than that kind of thing. But in your MIDI scroll, that middle note is going to be plopped right in there as a note that the oscillators in your synth are going to reproduce. And so my advice and my experience when recording with this thing is I play my part in and I then go back and I fix all the mistakes. Even if I feel I played my part correctly, I then have to go back and make sure that the notes that died too early, that the MIDI pickup just stopped tracking, that those get dragged out to their proper length, that all the weird wrong notes of like I strummed a chord and a dead note registered as a wrong note in the MIDI scroll. You have to go back and clean all of that up. But here's the thing about that workflow. that doesn't actually bother me for this instrument, because the goal for me in using a guitar like this, a MIDI controller like this, is not to get the perfect performance out of the instrument and then print it. The goal of this is to take the way that my brain sees intervals, the way that my brain builds chords, melodies, counter melodies, harmonies, which is around the fretboard. I'm a guitarist predominantly, and this is the way I kind of hear and see and visualize chords and melody, and the ability to kind of get these things quickly into my project. I can fix it later, and that doesn't bother me to do that work. But I am not a piano player with the proficiency to kind of sit down and start arranging and do like that kind of stuff is not going to come remotely naturally to me on the piano. And it wouldn't for a year, 2 years, if I really put the work into woodshed getting better. This is the way my brain works, roughly approximated into my DAW, and then I can just clean it up afterwards. It's the same way I produce drums. I sloppily play my drum parts in on the touch pads, the velocity pads on a keyboard, and then I go back and I quantize and I humanize and I do all the work that needs to be done to make it sound good in post. But I just want effective ways to get the sounds in my head into my project, and to that end, a MIDI pickup goes a long way in that workflow for me. And I am of the opinion that the Jamstik MIDI pickup, or the Jamstik guitar specifically, is an effective way to do that, especially because it does a lot of the processing of that MIDI translation information in the guitar itself and doesn't put that workload onto your CPU. So this is a pretty versatile instrument. It is a competently made guitar, and it is an expressive way to get your kind of guitar-focused ideas into un-guitar contexts. So let's give it an actual listen. Let's plug it into the amplifier, put it through its paces as a proper guitar, and then kind of get into our DAW and hear it as kind of a replacement workflow for some of my favorite sounds in my DAW. So let's go ahead and start things off by running through our different pickups. We'll start in position 1 with the humbucker and work our way up through to position number 5, the neck. We are running the Jamstik through my pedal board, but everything is bypassed into that matchless Chieftain and out to a universal audio aux serving as our cabinets, our microphones, and a plate reverb. So let's give it a listen. And with a little bit of overdrive, this is the Greer Lightspeed. Position 2, the kind of first of the 2 out of phase sounds. And with some compression. Turn that compressor back off and middle position. Position 4. Let's grab a compressor and some chorus. Back to dry. And neck position. With that Greer. All right, so we've got Polymax pulled up in Universal Audio's Luna. Polymax is a native VST, a native synth plugin for Luna, and I'm a fan of it. And so like normally we've got right now a pad pulled up, and traditionally you would use a keyboard of some kind. To play, but like I said, I'm not a keys player. And I find that being able to kind of like articulate and move around effectively is a lot more doable with the guitar. So by plugging into the USB on the MIDI output on the bottom of this, enabling this as a device in your DAW, which is the same as enabling any other MIDI controller, you now can go. And you hear that kind of atonality, and that slide down can be a little bit. Yeah, it's nice to be able to kind of go with like the chord shapes that I already know that I like. and just have them translate directly into my synthesizers.